Hello everyone, and a huge welcome to Blockshop and today's Science Talk. This is the first Science Talk we have in our series, and it will also be the last one before our summer break, so I'm very excited about today. And we're here today in Blockshop, which is a co-working space and innovation hub in Copenhagen, and we have participants both live in the room and also online, so welcome everyone. For the ones who don't know me, I'm Jule Rumpe. I'm the science coordinator here at Blockshop, and I'm also hosting this year's series of the Science Talks. And before we dive into today's Science Talks by Tobias about the biodiversity in the UN17 Village here in Copenhagen, there's only one thing that I would like to mention. And this is that I would like to thank our partners for this year's series in the Science Talks, which is the International Union of Architects and the UIA World Congress of Architects, which is hosted this year in July here in Copenhagen, which is in about a month. And we're collaborating with the UIA, which also means that we took over their theme of the Congress, which is Leave No One Behind. And we at Blockshop, we have stretched it a bit because we want to leave no one and nothing behind. But together with the UIA, we as the series of science talks have identified architecture and urban design as a driving force to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So now let's shift our attention to Tobias and today's science talk. Tobias is project director at SLA, which is an internationally renowned nature-based solution design studio here in Copenhagen. And Tobias specializes in identifying potentials and challenges of a site and then utilizing them to create an innovative design. And today he will mainly talk about the development project UN17 Village here in Copenhagen. And it is an open laboratory for the implementation of all 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals in one united building project. And I'm personally very excited about this talk today about the UN17 Village because I think it taps in perfectly in our series of the Leave No One Behind, because it is the universal value from the United Nations without which we cannot achieve the SDGs. So enough from me. The last thing that I'm going to say is that we will have time for some Q&A after the talk. So for the ones of you online, feel free to post questions in the chat all along, and then we will come back to them afterwards. And for you guys in the room, we will also have some time for you to come back with some questions. All right, now Tobias, on to you.
All right, thank you, Jule. So I just went to Sweden the last weekend and spent some time in an old hotel that was converted into a summer house. And we were 4 families and 3 generations in this one summer house. And luckily the weather was really nice. So we could be outside with the children, doing kayaking and going fishing and just being together in the nature. And the reason why I bring it up is because it always gives me hope when I am in nature with my children. And we always try to teach them about the importance of preserving the qualities. And I hope it also gives you hope when you are out in and experience the nature. And probably you also feel sometimes that it can really bring people together. So to begin with, I will talk about the importance of biodiversity and why we need to keep it in mind when we make our designs. And I'm going to use UN17 Village as an example of how we work at SLA. At SLA, we have the saying that we design places for life and for all life. That's a key driver for us as designers, and we work together in a team in an interdisciplinary team with both biologists, anthropologists, geologists, and more actually. And it's because we believe that we can only design for the future if we work together across different fields. So I'm gonna take the next slide here. So in 2022, governments from around the world They came together for this UN Biodiversity Conference in Canada, the COP15, and they agreed a new set of goals that that should halt and reverse the nature laws. They also agreed that nature is critical for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals and for limiting the warming to 1.5 degrees. And there was Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General. He had a really beautiful final statement, and I'm just going to read it out. He said, "We need governments to develop ambitious national action plans that protect and preserve our natural gifts and put our planet on a path to healing. We need businesses and investors to put protection first in their business plans and invest in sustainable production and extraction method across every link of their supply chain. I urge you to do the right thing, step up for nature, step up for biodiversity, and step up for humanity." I think it was a really, really beautiful final statement, and for me, at least, it's very inspiring. So, what is biodiversity? Biodiversity is the biological diversity. It's a variability among living organisms from all sources, and that's including terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and all the ecological complexes of nature. Biodiversity and nature is often used in the same terms, and it can be it can be confusing for a lot of people. For example, if you mention nature, people have a different image in their mind. For some people, nature can be a cut lawn or a farmed field, and for others, nature is the wildlife that you experience. So we prefer to use biodiversity when we talk about the importance, because it's something you can measure and count. And here are some numbers, and it shows like a conservative number of how much biodiversity is there on the planet. And as you can see, there are 5,500 mammals, 10,000 birds, 40,000 fish, and 460,000 plants. Then there is the fungus. There are 1.5 million, and the insects are 5 million. And that's just in the species itself. And all of these, they contribute in the ecosystem services. And the ecosystem services is what we, as human beings, what we need to survive, actually. We get the oxygen, we get water, like all the things that we need to survive is things that comes from ecosystem services, and all these organisms are contributing to this. If we continue to the next here, you can see the biomass on the planet. And the biomass, that's the total sum of all living organisms. And the most substantial amount is plants. It's actually 82.5% of the total biomass that is plants. Then we have a whole lot of bacteria, fungus, archaea, and protists. Animals are only 0.04% of the total biomass, and from that, human beings are actually only 0.01%. So we are actually a really, really small part of the whole biomass, but we're really good at using that 0.01% to affect the whole planet. You can say that we are exploiting the rest of the planet's organisms. And on this map that has been made, you can see that there's only 22% of the planet that hasn't been exploited yet. The UN has set a goal to protect and preserve 17% of the planet. And you could say, okay, it's already there, but the UN also says that it has to be dispersed along the whole planet. It's not enough to count in the South and the North Pole, for example. So you can also ask, is 17% enough? But that's always a question of what you can agree on when you are a lot of countries that have to agree on a final statement. At least for us, we also believe that we need to look into how we can integrate ecosystems into our cities and also part of our farmlands, so we can reach an even higher percentage. Maybe some of you have seen this diagram before that shows the planetary boundaries of the planet. And it is part of the work of Johan Rockström, guy from Sweden, who has led a group of 28 scientists. And they identified these 9 processes for regulating and keeping the stability of our spaceship, planet Earth. And you can say that when we cross the boundaries for the planet, we as humans risk that we cannot survive and continue to develop and thrive. If we look at biodiversity, it looks actually really, really bad. We have by far crossed the safe zone for our small spaceship. In fact, we are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction, where species go extinct 100 times faster compared to the background extinction rate that is an average of the past 10 million years. Actually, 1 in every 8 species, they face the threat of extinction. And if we estimate that there are among 8 million species, not including bacteria though, then it's equal to 1 million species that we risk to lose. In fact, we have only discovered, identified and described 1.2 million species at the moment. So the estimate of 8 million species is what we believe is there. And at SLA, we're very aware of this. Recently, we had a group of architects and biologists that went to Abu Dhabi. And they found 3 insects that were the first public observations that were made of these insects. They had only been described earlier. And that just shows that because they could find these 3 insects without even looking specifically for them, it shows that there are so many insects that haven't been discovered yet, and especially maybe in countries where people haven't been looking for them. And then imagine also all the species that we will never find before they go extinct. And you can also ask, why is this a problem for humans? And in fact, all the biodiversity is a stabilizing factor for the planet. For example, biodiversity is the key to capturing and storing CO2. There's the genetic diversity that is important for all life. As you know, the way that life has evolved is through diversity. And in order to make sure that we in the future also have the same vast amount of different species, it's important that there is this diversity. We as humans, we need the ecosystem services, as I explained before. It's what the Earth system provides for us to live. It's oxygen to breathe, clean water to drink, and also for the production of food also. And what is the main threat of biodiversity? Well, there's the climate change, for one thing. That's a huge stress factor. Then there's the expansion of cities and deforestation and agriculture, overfishing, littering, and the spread of invasive species. This graph is from the Gupta Report from 2022. And it emphasizes that we, as humans, are part of nature. The ecosystem services they provide, they are the basis for our survival. And we need nature to provide us with food, water, and shelter, and regulating our climate and prevent disease. It's also mentioned the importance of nature for our health and our well-being. And it's something that we don't talk so much about, but we actually also rely on nature for all of our waste products. That means like all the CO2 that we pump out into the air, and also waste products like plastic, for example, and other pollutants. We can't just put it into a spaceship and send it out to space. We have to deal with it on the planet, and nature is the only solution for that also, that it can help us to store CO2, for example. I mean, I know now there are a lot of experiments with pumping CO2 into the ground also, but we actually have also a really, really important CO2 catcher in forest, and that's something we tend to forget sometimes. Gupta is interesting because he compares nature to the produced capital and the human capital. And he says that we have to acknowledge that nature is an asset, and it is even more than an economic good. Our ecosystems, they are extremely productive and resilient and adaptable, and it's really important that we remember that and not just think about the produced capital. If you compare it to a portfolio of financial assets, for example, you know that it's important that if you're a broker, that you don't rely on just one production. You will try to invest in different assets. And that's the same thing that biodiversity gives us. It's the importance of investing in nature and investing in biodiversity. And as you can see here, the graphs, they show that from 1922 to 2014, the produced capital per person has doubled, and human capital per person increased by 13% globally. But the stock of the natural capital per person declined by nearly 40%. So that means that we have prospered immensely in the recent decades, but we have only achieved this prosperity by the devastating cost to nature. In fact, right now it would take 1.6 Earths to maintain the world's current living standards. And in Denmark, we would actually need 4.3 Earths to sustain the wealth that we have at the moment. So it's really, really important that our governments start to invest in nature as well. And it's really important that we as designers also see nature as an asset, and we see ourselves as asset holders, because we also rely on nature. I mean, all the materials that we use for architecture, product design, everything, it comes from nature. And I think now, for example, the time when we had like an architect or a designer that would only think about form and function, and was this person's ideas and aesthetic feeling that provided us with design. Those times are over. We have to think about the impact that the design has on the planet as well. And I think every designer now, they agree on that, and we also see that students from the architect school, for example, they don't feel that it's enough just to see a look at functions and design. They also want to see the impact that it has on the planet. Yes. So moving on to the UN17 Village. The UN17 Village is, as Jules mentioned, based on the UN17 goals. And one of the most important things for the goals is the biosphere. I really like this diagram that shows how the biosphere kind of makes up the bottom of this cake diagram. Because society and economy, they are based on the biosphere that we have to work on protecting. Yes, we have had emphasis on the necessity of improving conditions for natural resources and biosphere to ensure favorable conditions for the goals related to people and society. And we have made efforts and progress towards the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and especially towards the goals that are related to the biosphere, where the progress is very slow. And it is really important that we take actions to promote biodiversity. As I mentioned, the economic growth over the past 100 years has been at the expense of nature, and biodiversity is determined by the diversity of ecosystem species and the genes that surround us. So, to achieve a resilient city, it's relevant to view the city as an ecosystem and as a part of nature. Denmark is also a part of a global objective, together with the UN and the EU, to halt the decline in biodiversity. And as I mentioned, we as designers, we are also obliged to halt the decline. Yes, it's important to integrate nature in the development of society, and especially in cities. And in the development of the UN Village, we have really strived to work with that. It can seem like a drop in the ocean that we work on this specific project, and for me, it's positive that there are some developers and investors that are interested in the subject. And even though we don't reach all the goals that have been set in the beginning, it's an important step that we see now, developers that are really taking it serious and making biodiversity strategies. For the project, we have worked really close with Sweco Architects, Atelier Engineers, Sigge Jensen as a contractor, and the client NREP. And before that, Lena was also a part of the project before we entered. And it's been a really good team also to try to work with these sustainability goals. But for us, the main focus has been on the landscape part. So it's an image of how we hope it will look like when they finish the project. And actually, now they just finished one building, and some people are moving in. I think today or tomorrow, actually. But we haven't started planting yet. So if you go there today, it will look pretty bare, with a lot of bare soil and not exactly like this. Yes, at SLA, we always begin with a biodiversity analysis before we start a project. And when we start up the biodiversity analysis, we work really, really close with the biologists. And they start to do a desktop analysis where they try to find what are the key, what is the key nature that surrounds the plot. So, for example, here you can see the small red plot, and it's completely surrounded by green areas from this image. And yeah, some of the vegetation is mentioned here. It's beech meadow, annual beech meadow vegetation, dunes, and grassland, chalk and acidic grassland. Then they look into what has been registered in the area. And in this area on the map to the left, you can see all the registration of species that has been made in the area. And to the right, you can see some of the habitats that are in the area. So there's been found 3,423 species of plants, insects, and amphibians, mammals, and reptiles. And actually among them there are also 7 orchid species, which are all protected. And here you can see some of the more interesting findings. For example, there's the great crested newt. It looks like a small dragon. Then there's the Marsh epipactis sumphullebe in Danish. It's a pretty rare orchid. There's the European green toad, in Danish grønbroget tudse. And it has this really, really beautiful pattern of army-like green. Then there's the, sorry, let's see. Yeah, the next one, the lesser purple emperor. It's a butterfly that is only found out in Pinseskoven here at Amager. It hasn't been found anywhere else in Denmark. It could be also because it looks a little bit similar to the purple emperor, which is a little bit bigger and not as small as that one. Then there's the moor frog. It has this really funny sound when it squeaks or quacks. It sounds like a small dog, actually. If you go online, you can try to listen to the sound. It's really funny. Then there's the last one. I couldn't find the English word for that one. It's called brændeskærm. It's also only found in Amager. So a lot of these species, you can say, they're all protected, and what would happen if one of these disappeared? And the answer is probably nothing would really happen. We wouldn't discover it. But what can be really devastating is because we don't know what part of ecosystems these animals they have. So what worries a lot of biologists is the collapse of ecosystems when a lot of species are gone. So how we work with it is we try to look into what are the habitats in the area, and we try to convert that into the design of the landscape. And biologists, they will look at the desktop analysis. They will also go out in the field and search and find out what would be important to emphasize in this project. And for example, here is the seasonal wet meadow. And there's this beautiful insect called køllesværmer. It has this red and black colors to show predators that it is really toxic and dangerous to eat. And these moist meadows, they can be found in Kalvebod Fællet, and they include areas around Pinseskoven also. And this habitat, it occurs when salt influence is lower than a salt marsh. Then there's the dry grassland, or the grassland. It's called overdrev in Danish. It's a type of habitat, you can say, that is that works well with disturbance. So we can use it in areas where where you have people walking, or where it's not so important to keep people out, because it's a type of habitat that is used to being disturbed by big animals. Today it's mostly cows and horses, but earlier it would be all kind of big mammals that would create this kind of nature. And for this one, our biologists they told us to look specifically for this stor bredpande. So the reason why they bring out these insects, they take out one type, is because it's something that we can also use afterwards to go and search. Did we really manage to create this kind of nature in the area if we go out and find one of these insects? The next type of nature that habitat is the forest edge, and that's the transition between the forest and the open land. And here there's a lot of life in this specific area, and it's a great food source for birds and even for humans, because there are a lot of berry bushes and even like apples, wild apples. And there's a picture here of the European robin, I think it's called in English. It's rødhals. And it has this ability that it also sings during the winter. So it's a bird that you can hear all year round, actually. Then there's the salt marsh. And that's also a really typical part of Kalvebod Fælled. And we also really wanted to bring that into the UN Village. Of course, I mean, when we look at all these types, it's not possible to create the exact conditions as you would find in nature, but we see it as kind of like also kind of like a storytelling, where we have people that they learn about this and then they want to go out and see it in the real conditions. But here's a blue iris that is also it's also really rare. There are actually only 2 populations of blue iris in Denmark, and one is in Kalvebod Fælled, and the other one is out at Salhorn. A funny fact is that it spreads its seeds with water in the terrain, whereas other plants will need animals or wind to disperse the seeds. So in the UN Village, we have worked with 5 courtyards, and we have tried to integrate these types of nature into the courtyards. So we have the 5 courtyards that are centered around this axis, and the axis provides the ability to go with your bicycle or and just find your way through the area. The 5 courtyards corresponds to the 5 buildings that are out in the UN Village. So the first one, we call it the edible courtyard, and it's a courtyard where we have worked a lot with edible plants and bushes. So you can go out and forage, or you can cultivate something in the planting beds. It's really important also in the UN Village that we provide the opportunity for example, elderly people to experience, for example, foraging. They don't have the same ability if you're disabled or you don't walk really well. You don't have the opportunity to just walk out into the field and do like experience how it is to forage. So it was really important for us to bring it all the way into the courtyards. Then there's the social courtyard, and in this courtyard we had the emphasis on bringing people together. It's also one of the goals for the project to make sure that people are not lonely and they can engage in community. So it was important for us to create spaces where they can meet, terraces, and also small areas of cut grass. So that means, like, even though we try to put as much diversity into our courtyards and as many wild plants as possible and tall grasses and bushes, we also need to make sure that that there's also spaces where people can meet and put out a blanket, for example. An image of how it could look. It's also one of the things that we always work with is putting out trunks, big trunks, into our projects, and it's not just a trademark that that we put to make it look like nature. It's actually small, like insect hotels, and places where insects they can take refuge during the winter, for example. Then there's the courtyard for learning and play, and in this courtyard it has been really important to design for children, so they can go out with their parents and play in the courtyard. Nature really provides like an opportunity to play without a predetermined game or someone that tells you like how to play. You can use your fantasy and play in nature. Another really important thing is the learnings that the children get from nature. So a lot of the elements we have put there is to make it possible for children to discover, for example, life around and in small water holes, and also to just play hide and seek in the bushes. And we also put out, of course, some elements for play, for example, for training your balance, but emphasis is always on play in nature. Then there's one courtyard where we really focused on health, and I mean, a lot of the things that we work with in one courtyard is also used in other courtyards. It's more like where we can like put more emphasis on health. For example, in one courtyard, it doesn't mean that there's no emphasis on health in the other courtyards. But for this one, for example, we were able to plant a lot of trees here in this courtyard because there's no parking lot underground. Otherwise, most of the project is actually on top of a big parking lot, and that's one of the important what do you call things. Also, when we work with the urban environment, is that the need for putting cars underground, because it makes it possible to create a landscape on top. Because at the moment, cars are a factor that we need to take into account, and yeah, it's just it's better to get them underground anyway. But it also makes it really difficult for us as designers, because we have to find plants that can survive in these conditions where you don't have soil all the way down to the groundwater. So one of the first things that we really put emphasis on was the need for irrigation in the project. In fact, rainwater is harvested from the roofs, and it is put into an underground water tank, where it is used for watering the plants. With this courtyard, we also looked into this article from Aarhus University, where it shows that there is up to 55% higher wait, I'll just continue. Anyway, what we have worked with in this courtyard is also the fitness, where you can have areas where you can stretch out or you can train your balance. And most people will probably take a run out in Kalvebodfjellet. And then they can meet here in this courtyard before going out for a run. Then there's these insect fences, call them, that we have put around in the courtyards. And it's for children to go and discover the insects that take nest in these places. But it's also used when they have to maintain the project. So instead of removing all the branches, they can put them into these insect fences. Then there is a key design element is also these areas with coniferous trees. That makes you want to go out also during the winter and experience the courtyards, and hopefully it will also give you courage to continue out into Amagerfjellet or Kalvebodfjellet. Let me just go back to this one. Yeah, what I wanted to say was that the urban residence is associated with a higher risk of some psychiatric disorders. And there is up to 55% higher chance that you will get a disorder compared to those people who live in close to green spaces. Then the next courtyard, we call it the courtyard for birds. And again, we were able to work with this forest edge character. And we have created this niche where people, they are invited to enjoy the calmness and listen to the bird songs. We plant a lot of bushes with berries that birds can go and forage on. But we also always put out stones in our projects and rocks that we put together, and they also become insect hotels and also a place where birds can go and look for food. We have also worked on the rooftops at the UN Village, but actually most of the space in UN Village is used for solar cells. And next to the solar cells there is this green roof of sedum that is not really that important for biodiversity, but it also helps to slow down the water that lands on the roofs. But we have put emphasis on creating some small spaces where people can meet up on the rooftops. And for example, we have these greenhouses that are meant for people to come together. As I mentioned before, the rainwater is harvested from the roof and put down to a water tank. Then there's light and darkness. And it's really important for us to work with the lighting of our projects, and especially with artificial lighting, because it disrupts the natural rhythm. Lighting disturbs the circadian rhythm, and it has a negative impact on a lot of animals, including insects, birds and bats, but actually also on plants. It's important to bring this aspect into UN Village as well. And we really strive to find a solution where we work with the natural cycle of light and darkness. It's not just animals and plants that are affected by artificial lighting, it's also humans. So therefore, all the light sources must be really carefully considered. and we always try to assess the necessity of lighting in the projects. At the same time, it's really important to work with light, because good light, it promotes social activities and it supports navigation, and it also enhances the feeling of security. It's important that it's pleasant to stay in the courtyards during day and night. And one thing that you can think about in lighting is that it's not necessarily the same light that you need at 8 p.m. as 3 p.m. in the night. So instead of looking at the night as a uniformity thing, you'll have to see it as a more dynamic thing that changes over time. So we work with some lighting criteria in our projects, and one of them is to work with low intensity of the light, and we always try to minimize the contrast between light and darkness, and in some areas it can be challenging because there is a need for more lighting, for example at the parking areas. But we always try to lower the light as much as possible, so you don't get this huge contrast between dark and light. Then there's a warm spectrum. We try to work with color temperature and adjust it so it fits to the natural light. And especially we try to avoid the blue wavelengths in the evening, because the blue wavelengths, as you can see, is imitating the daylight, and that's actually really, really bad for both your brain as a human being, and it can make it difficult to fall asleep if you have been in contact with a lot of blue light. I think now probably a lot of you have a phone that turns yellow in the evening if you have the correct settings, and that's also to help you to relax more before you go to sleep. And that's the same thing for animals and insects. Then there's the control, and it should be able to you should be able to control the light so it turns off, for example, if there's no activity. Or that it turns off during the night hours. Then the last thing is the direction. It's really important that you direct the lights so you don't get the glare. So a lot of the fixtures can be adjusted after they've been put up, but otherwise it's about having a fixture that is shielded in the correct way. And the last thing we worked with in the project was these recycled furnitures. And it's one of the things that haven't been really, that we haven't finished completely. It's something that we have to work really closely with the contractor on. But we went out and visited a big storage place they have, where they bring in materials that has been taken down from other buildings, and it's kind of a big material database where you can go out and harvest materials, for example, for creating furnitures. And we tried to look at the materials that were there at the moment, and tried to imagine how can we put them together without using glue or screws, and just put them together with joints or stacking things together. And it's not something that we have completely finished, as I said, but it also made me think about like how important it is with the materials we use and the indirect effect it also has on biodiversity. For example, using concrete, you need sand, and when you need sand, you can, for example, go out and get it from the seabed, but it's actually really, really bad for the marine ecosystems. And we always have to think like that as designers. where does the materials come from? What effects do they have on nature? It's not enough just to think that the materials, they just pop out in the air and then we can use them. All right. So yeah. So the last slide. Let's include nature. And yeah, although we as humans have different views on nature and conservation, I really believe that that we share this deep connection to nature, and that nature can bring us together, just like the feeling I had in Sweden last weekend. And I really hope that we, as humans, can find solutions for the future together. Yeah, that's it.
Super, thank you, Tobias. Now
Thank
I feel
you.
like I want to go out to nature.
Yeah.
So now if there's any questions or comments. Oh, we already have one. We have only this mic, so I'll just walk around and give you the mic.
Thank you so much for a very nice introduction, Tobias. I'm interested in asking you, do you never ever introduce a plant or flowers or something that is not native to the area you're working in? As I understood it, you were doing an analysis of the adjacent nature area in Amager, and based on that, you decide what to use in the project. Is that like a dogma you have, or?
We always strive to use as many native plants as possible. In the UN Village, we set a goal to use 80% native plants, but it's actually rare that we say that we use 100% native plants. It's also because there's always discussions on when is a plant completely native and when is it not native, and then there's also the discussion on the climate change. Because we have actually started to plant trees in our project, for example, that we know that can outlive also if the temperature rises with 1 or 2 degrees. Then there's also the services that, for example, a tree provides in a road area, and if we plant trees on a road, our main design purpose might not be biodiversity. It can also be other services that tree provides, and it can be the feeling of parking your car under a tree in the shade, for example. Then it's not so important that it's native. Then it's more important that it can thrive in a really hostile area with asphalt and cars going by all the time. And you also need to cut off the branches on the tree in order for the cars to go under it. So in those specific cases, we don't say that we have to use only native plants, but we always strive to have at least like 70 or 80% of native plants in our projects. We didn't used to do that before, but in the recent years, it's been a main focus for us.
I think now we have a question in the chat, and then back to you.
Yes, I have a question in the chat from Emily. She's asking, is there any concern that the plantings will attract the wrong kind of biodiversity? For example, seagulls can be quite a nuisance, and ants and mites can get into people's home, and etc., examples like that?
I mean, I think in Copenhagen, the main concern is rats, for example. And rats have been really good at adjusting to humans. They are really thriving, and they love to live in cities. And I don't think humans will ever be able to combat those type of animals that are so good at evolving and changing. So it's not something that we work that much with. But we do, when we work with clients, take the discussion. And for example, we don't put a big pile of what do you call, like branches really close to a kitchen, for example, or where they a hotel where they put out the garbage. So we do think about these things, but it's not like a key design factor for us.
I wanted to ask about your team's considerations about longevity of this design, because of course you are creating something amazing and it will grow and it will change. How will this affect, for example, the upskilling of vice-versa roles or new type of jobs that this kind of design would need, like roles, people that would take care of it, and also how to inform the citizens about the benefits, because there's always this struggle, at least the experience I've had, that some people want sun and view and others totally fine with greenery. So like, how do you imagine, or how do you advise the housing association or whoever owns that space?
Yeah, it's a completely, it's a new way of like looking at maintenance for example. So so we always try or strive to, in our projects, to not just give them the design and then say goodbye. We always try to keep in contact with the client and the people that are going to maintain the area later on. And we try to tell them that it's not going to be a big hassle for you. It's actually can be less work sometimes, because you don't have to move away all like dead branches. You can just leave some of them on the ground. You don't need to cut the grass all the time. But the biggest struggle is actually in people's mind, because we associate, for example, a cut lawn with someone that is taking care of the environment, and thereby taking care of you also as a citizen or like a resident in this building. So I think for UN Village, it has been a part of the strategy also to tell about nature and why it's important that we bring it really, really close to people. But in all projects, we have to go out and tell this story again and again and again, because you always get people that prefer a cut lawn or prefer that they can see really far out into the horizon without any trees blocking the view. And I also think that it also has to be a shift in the way that the people selling and developers, how they tell about a project, instead of saying like you get the greatest view where you can see the sea without any interruptions, that you tell the story about how you look out and you see a tree and you listen to the bird song and all these stories that we're not used to telling.
Thank you, Tobias.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one last question, which I would take if no one else would want to. Because we have been also, I know that the UN17 Village is working with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So I was just wondering, I know that SLA is not the developer, but do you have insight in how they use the SDGs as a framework, or maybe something else, or how you at SLA are using the SDGs as a framework also in connection with that project? And I think if you could answer that in 2 minutes and then the time is up, that would be great.
All right. Yeah, I mean, of course, we also look into the 17 goals, and a lot of them are really relevant to us. For example, as I mentioned, regarding the biosphere. And we don't use it as a checklist and say that, okay, now we solve this problem and this problem. We try to look at it as a whole. And I think actually a lot of the solutions we find, they also benefit like other goals. So I think it's really important that we don't see it as a checklist. I mean, for example, like if you go into to try and buy an apartment now at the UN Village, you will see the goals in the bottom, and sometimes it could feel a bit like people are trying to live up to all the goals. So we have to tell a story about poverty also, or about social inclusion. But for us, it's not it's not important that we like keep track of all 17 goals. It's just the whole like picture when you look at it. So
Great. Thank you so much. So I think now the time is up, and before we give Tobias the last huge applause, I just want to say thank you for everyone for coming and participating also online. And as I said also in the beginning, this is the last science talk before the summer break, so we come back in August, by the end of August. So thank you for today, and see you after summer. Thank you, Tobias.
you.